Keeping in touch with your community through local news and information is the gift that keeps giving all year long. Subscribe now to get 50% off an annual subscription for you or anyone on your list. Visit inforum.com/subscribe to get started.
John Denver spent a lot of time in the upper Midwest, touring and living here. Some readers are sharing their memories of their brushes with his greatness. Hi, this is Tracy Briggs, and welcome to Back Then. All of those years ago when I was a kid listening to John Denver's greatest hits, watching him hang out with the Muppets, or meeting God, or rather George Burns as God in that movie, remember that one? I never knew that some of my neighbors were actually hobnobbing with the man. I only discovered this after I wrote a story a couple of weeks ago about how John Denver once lived in Minnesota. He was there for 3 years, where he found some of his earliest success. He celebrated his first songwriting hit in Minnesota. It was Leaving on a Jet Plane, sung by Peter, Paul, and Mary. He was inspired by a gloomy, cloudy Minnesota spring day to write his first number one hit as a recording artist. That hit was Sunshine on My Shoulders. And probably most importantly, he married a Minnesotan named Annie Martell. She was a student at Gustavus Adolphus, and she inspired another number one hit of his. Of course, that one was Annie's Song. So while Rocky Mountain High, Colorado, and Take Me Home Country Roads, West Virginia, can claim the mop-topped, granny glass-wearing superstar, some of us in Minnesota and even North Dakota have had our own brushes with his greatness. So after that story ran, and again, you can go back and read that story on inforum.com, just search for John Denver, Back Then with Tracy Briggs, and it should come up. After that story ran, I heard comments like, "My aunt was in Annie's sorority at Gustavus Adolphus. We always thought that was so cool growing up. My husband toured with him back in the day." And one reader commented that his friend ran into Denver at an impromptu jam session. Here's what he said. He was hanging with some friends one evening, and there was a campfire and some guitars. Some more young folks showed up, and they brought with them this fellow who came to be known as John Denver. He described Denver as really talented, even back then, soft-spoken, and very friendly. Kim Brust, formerly of Fargo, now living in Seattle, has the distinction of meeting John Denver when Kim Brust was just a kid. He said he was probably about 7 or 8 when he met John Denver while he was performing with the Mitchell Trio in the early to mid-60s. His father, professional photographer Everett Brust, was hired to take photos of the concert at NDSU, so Brust and his sister got to go backstage where Denver talked to them. He said, "What you saw on stage was pretty much what he was like in real life." Here's what Kim Brust said. "He was very funny, so friendly and gregarious. I do remember that he joked around with my sister Linda, who's 4 years younger than me. He was so fun to be around and made it a fun experience for us, too." He said when Denver started to get even more famous, he went back to see him in concert at Alex Nemzik Stadium in Moorhead. Here's what he said about that. "We were way in the back and in the bleachers, and there wasn't a huge audience, and he just waved all the guys in the bleachers and said, 'Come on up here.' And we sat literally in front of the stage. He had encore after encore. His voice was getting hoarse. And then the last song I remember him singing was America the Beautiful. It was a really cool experience." Of course, not everyone ran into Denver in the upper Midwest. Deb McShane of Fargo shared a story of how when she and her late husband Tom were young newlyweds in the late 70s, they were just 20 and 21, they took a trip to Aspen where they had an encounter. Here's what she said. "Traveling in front of us was a new black Jeep Grand Cherokee. We both looked at each other and laughed because we had seen photos of John Denver in a vehicle just like that. Tom sped up. The man in the Cherokee had a blonde mop top and a John Denver type hat. We followed him at a decent distance until he went through a gated community with a wave to the attendant. We looked up and a sign over the development read Starwood. And of course, Denver wrote a song about his home called Starwood at Aspen." Deb goes on to say, "Of course, we got stopped, and no, we couldn't just drive around, and no, we couldn't take a photo of the sign." McShane says she went back to Aspen last year on the 10th anniversary of Tom's death. She visited the sanctuary built in Denver's honor and certainly remembered that day all of those years ago. She said, "There's no way to know for sure if it was John Denver in that car, but it sure got two kids from North Dakota pretty excited." Thanks for joining us on Back Then. I hope you join me again next week.
Get reliable and accurate local news with Inform.com. Inform.com is your trusted local news source with journalists dedicated to keeping you informed about what's happening in your community. Visit Inform.com now.